The last night on Elm Street. Elm Street had always been a quiet, unassuming neighborhood where the sound of crickets filled the night and porch lights glowed like watchful eyes. But for years, there had been whispers, a story told in hushed tones about the other Elm Street, the one that existed only when the clock struck midnight. No one knew where it came from or why, but once in a while, the peaceful neighborhood transformed into a twisted reflection of itself. It was late October, and the chill of autumn wrapped around the town like a shroud. Sarah, a college student home for the weekend, had decided to stay up late in her family's old house. She loved Elm Street's quiet charm and had planned to use the time to catch up on schoolwork. At exactly 11:57 p.m., a knock came at the door. Confused, she hesitated, peering out the window. A man stood on the porch, his face obscured by the brim of a wide hat. He was dressed in an old-fashioned trench coat, and something about his stance set her on edge. "Can I help you?" Sarah called through the closed door. "You need to leave," the man said in a flat, almost mechanical tone. "Excuse me? Leave, before it begins." Sarah felt a chill creep down her spine. "Before what begins?" she asked, but the man had already turned and walked down the porch steps, vanishing into the shadows of the street. The grandfather clock in the living room struck 12, and Sarah felt the air shift. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the sound, the feeling of the house itself. The walls seemed to groan as if alive, and the familiar hum of the refrigerator was replaced by a deep, resonant silence. When she looked outside, Elm Street had changed. The neat rows of houses were distorted, their windows like hollow eyes. Street lamps flickered, casting jagged shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. The road itself seemed longer, stretching into a dense, impenetrable fog. Sarah grabbed her phone but found it dead. The house was no longer a sanctuary, it felt like a trap. As Sarah debated whether to leave, she heard footsteps upstairs. Her parents were out of town, and no one else was supposed to be there. Grabbing a flashlight, she cautiously ascended the creaking staircase. She opened the door to her old bedroom and froze. A woman stood in the corner, her back to Sarah. Her long hair was tangled, and her pale arms hung limply at her sides. "Hello?" Sarah whispered. The woman turned, revealing a face contorted with unnatural glee. Her lips stretched too wide, her eyes black pits. "It's almost time," she hissed. Sarah stumbled backward and slammed the door shut, her heart pounding. She fled downstairs, but the front door was now gone, replaced by a solid wall. Through the windows, Sarah saw movement. Figures wandered the street, neighbors, or at least they resembled them. But their movements were jerky, like marionettes controlled by unseen strings. A knock came at the back door. Against her better judgment, Sarah looked through the peephole. It was the man from earlier, his face now visible. His eyes were hollow sockets, his skin pale and cracked like old porcelain. "Let me in," he rasped. "It's safer together." Terrified, Sarah backed away, only to hear whispers rising around her. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, and the whispers became a chorus of voices. "Stay, stay, stay forever." Desperate, Sarah remembered the basement door. It was a long shot, but it might still lead outside. She bolted for it, ignoring the whispers and the grotesque figures that now roamed her house. The basement was worse. The air was damp and heavy, and the single light bulb cast an eerie glow. But in the far corner, she saw a trapdoor she didn't remember being there before. The whispers grew louder, and Sarah knew she had no choice. She flung open the trapdoor and climbed down into the darkness. She fell for what felt like hours, landing in a strange, mirrored version of her street. The houses were pristine, and the air was eerily still. But there was no sky, just a swirling void above. She wandered, calling for help, but the silence was oppressive. Then, one by one, the doors of the houses opened and figures emerged. They looked like her neighbors, but with empty, glowing eyes and twisted smiles. "This is your home now," they chanted, advancing toward her. "You belong to Elm Street." Just as they reached her, Sarah woke up. She was back in her bed, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. Morning light streamed through the window, and everything seemed normal again. But as she got up, she noticed something on her bedside table, a single, pale key. It wasn't hers. From outside, she heard a knock at the door. "Sarah," a voice called. It was the man from the night before. "You didn't leave. Now, it begins again." And this time, she knew there would be no escape.